Hello, EFF fans and family, and welcome to our premiere version of our live stream, hovering and orbiting around EFF's rather new, but not that new. We're in the second series podcast, How to Fix the Internet. I'm Danny O'Brien. I'm one of the co-hosts, and then I will wave like this and introduce Cindy Cohn, who is the executive director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Hello.
I got waved in.
It's great. We're masters of the internet, so we can just control it with our hands at this point. Cindy and I interview the best, most interesting, and most productive people trying to fix the internet at the moment. And we have, I think, they're all equal favorites, but still, we wanted to get Tarah Wheeler on, first of all. Tarah is, I have to read this out. But Tarah Wheeler is an information security executive, social scientist in the area of international conflict, author, and poker player. She serves on the EFF Advisory Board as a cyber policy fellow at Harvard and as international security fellow at New America. She was Fulbright Scholar in cybersecurity last year, and you can find her on Twitter at Tarah with an H, or at her website, https://tarah.org. Hey, Tarah.
You pinged?
Yes, we have invited you into our parlor. So how long have you two known each other? How's that? Where did you two meet, first of all?
I think it was an email of desperation once upon a time. I think I emailed Cindy, and the basic gist was, where are some of those EFF attack lawyers again? that was about it. And then the conversation got going. Yeah. Oh, where's an attack lawyer when you need one? Well, this is where you go.
Attack lawyers, defense lawyers, it's kind of the EFF thing.
Yeah.
So the episode that was just gone out that Tarah was our guest on was Pay a Hacker, Save a Life. And we were basically talking about, I don't know whether you overuse this term, trash fire, Tarah, but the kind of ongoing battle to both protect security and protect security researchers, right? And I think this is where, as you say, EFF and the InfoSec community frequently meet. Cindy, maybe you could talk a bit about what that looks like what part of EFF does that kind of work?
Yeah, well, Tara's right. One of the things we do is security researchers who think they might be in trouble or can see trouble ahead will just reach out and be like, help. And we have a whole project at EFF called that we call the Coders' Rights Project, which are the kind of lawyers who are especially interested in that work. I would say, this is one of the things where we have, I don't say we're all the way to success, but we have a partial success. In the early days, I've been at EFF for a long time. So around 2000, 2001, 2002, if a security researcher reached out to us, we were very worried about them getting arrested. I once took a, overnight plane to Boston to try to, protect some kids who'd been sued by the city for talking about how there were security flaws in the Charlie card, which is the Boston Metro thing, and so that they could give a presentation at DEF CON. It used to be kind of a crazy all hands on deck, big risk moment. Now, the risk is still too big, but I think that one of the things that was fun in talking with Tara is about how, we've leveled up in terms of the ability to protect people. Companies are more open. They've got a lot more to do, but at least, it is pretty rare that we worry about somebody seriously going to jail because they've talked about a security flaw. So that's good news. We want to protect people, but really it's still a thing we do. We do it, in the months before DEF CON, especially in the Las Vegas security conferences, but also any real security conferences where people are going to be presenting things that they've discovered. We will be pretty busy trying to help navigate the situation.
So Tarah, people who want to find the big plan you have, and you have a really good big plan, should listen to the podcast. But how do you end up intersecting with this world of, hackers just about to save the world and then being dragged off by the cops.
Oh God.
to paint it in its most, exciting way.
How do I intersect with this world? Unwillingly, most of the time, when it comes to the law enforcement side of things. But no, I think I end up in some of these conversations because I cross-cut some of the fields in information security. So when we talk about things like international conflict and information security, stuff that crosses borders, I tend to get interested. So I am interested in how sort of the world views information security researchers, because I started out actually in academia. Originally I'm a failed original academic. And so it turns out that they want money to keep educating you after a period of time. And Microsoft made a wee little mistake over understanding the difference between game theory and game design, which is how I ended up over in web application security and working on that. And so I've actually joked to several people at this point that I started out doing case studies on China, North Korea, the relationships in the European Union when it comes to things like cross-border conflict. And 20 years later, I'm still doing that. I've come all the way back around to that again in this field, because we're now at the international politics level. So that's how I sort of get involved in it. And other than that, accidentally, when not unwillingly.
Yeah, it definitely is shading into geopolitics these days. So maybe we'll find out what people think of InfoSec researchers. If you have any questions for Tarah, throw them in the chat, and then sophisticated GPT-3 AI bots will copy and paste them into our channel, and we as other bots will answer them. But we have some already set up, so I will click on that little window. Okay, this one's a good one. So has the computer security industry got more professional over your time in it? I think this is to both you and Cindy. And what has that professionalization, has it been a good thing?
I can start on this one, pass it back to Cindy, and then sort of mop up at the end if you wish. I've been in this field knowingly for more than a decade, and unknowingly for almost 20 years. I didn't know the thing I was doing 20 years ago was called information security, when I was busy doing community management and web application security, then trying to figure out the vulnerabilities in front-end web applications and stuff like that. I didn't know that's the thing I was doing. So I have an opinion on the industry and the community that's only about a decade old. But my opinion on the professionalization of what we do, I think some of it's grown more standardized and more automated. But at the same time, I think that the industry growing bigger isn't necessarily a reflection of it becoming better. I think that there's a big spread of capability, of quality, and I think that, like any place else where there is a gold rush, there are some scam artists out there, and so it's difficult to sometimes tell the difference between the real deal and people who have just set up shop with a handy website, right? So it's difficult to tell, and it's one of the reasons why, professional or not, I think the information security community is still so tightly integrated socially, because most of the time it's really difficult for people outside the field to tell whether or not someone's any good at InfoSec or not, unless they're vouched for. So the answer is still the relationships and the tight community over time. I think we don't have a good way. There's no way to put like a degree on your wall that says I'm a hacker. There's just nothing there that you can do.
Despite you having lots of degrees on your wall behind you, like that.
So I don't know how many of you folks are just like super into. That's not Neo. That's John Wick. And I made my own meme. So then the meme is, what is it? Work until you no longer have to introduce yourself. I keep myself centered with the fact that that's not a degree. That's my GED.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. No, I'm a high school dropout a lot. Like, I like school. I've succeeded at one or two of the schools I've tried, gotten kicked out of or dropped out of more than I succeeded at. But I'm weird like everybody else in InfoSec, right?
Yeah,
so.
Sure.
And so there's not really a good way to certify that, I don't. So
I mean, I think that's right. And it's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? I think that the one thing about InfoSec is that people who don't think like the kind of people who can make their way through a educational process, check all the boxes and get the certificate, like that's actually, there are plenty of security researchers who are awesome and who have advanced degrees and who can do all of that. But then there's also this other piece of it where it's really a place where people who don't think in that way also have a space and can do amazing things and can see things differently. It's definitely much more professional than when we started, and less academic. There was a lot of academic research, security research going on kind of early on. And now, there are firms and there are, if you hire somebody to hack your system, you've got, which didn't really exist in the same way when we started this. But then there's also these, I have to say sometimes, these like kids, right? EFF's handling a case now for a kid who figured out that the Proctorio software that, kids have to install to spy on them while they're taking tests and stuff was not very good. And, he's just a kid and, figured out, the problems thing. And he's, we're in litigation over that right now. Like the kind of, that piece of it hasn't really gone away. And to me, it's the fun, it's where some of the fun stuff lives. Of course, some of those are people who really do need to talk to EFF before they go a little further. But it really, I feel like it has grown and there is a professionalization piece, but the kind of other piece of smart people who want to take things apart and figure out how they work and then stumble into security problems along the way is alive and well.
Right.
It really is.
I feel like there was, so I covered this as a journalist in the sort of early bit of it. And I mean, the thing that struck me sort of being embedded in it, I just remember being in a squat in Manchester with all these hackers going, what am I doing here? A shout out to the Access All area people for letting me stay there that night. But it really felt like a kind of fork in the road for a lot of 17-year-olds at that point, where it was either, have a well-paid job in the industry or go to jail. I mean, I won't name it, Cindy, but like one of the people that we work with, I remember talking to him and said, sort of, how do you get into this? He said, well, I got caught in a phone exchange wearing a Bell Labs uniform. And I wasn't actually not Bell Labs, a Pac Bell uniform. And I wasn't actually an employee. So that was kind of, certainly a point where he had to like put his life in order. And so for me right then, it really seemed like it wasn't so much about professionalization as trying to get kids who thought in a particular way and find them a home in a place where they could, they could benefit society rather than just spin their wheels and get into trouble. And it's really interesting you saying that, Cindy, that is still, that stream is still alive, right?
Yep.
I do want to jump in on this one right here, if it's okay. And just, there's a reason I'm kind of so upright at the moment. Like, let me just get really real with you. I think that the professionalization of our industry is self-defense more than anything else. Yeah. And the answer to that has to do with the fact that we have to be so credentialed to have a defense when something does go wrong. Right. No, I'm legit. Remember I told you I was gonna do morning wine. We're doing afternoon wine right now. Here's the reason why. Literally right this second.
All I have is bubbly water.
Oh no. I feel like my product placement here is not like, but
it's so I'm gonna be super, super real with you right now. Literally, I got off the phone with my husband a little bit ago. For those of you that don't know, I'm married to Deviant Olaf. He's a very well-known physical penetration specialist and security expert. He created like lockpick villages. He's really well-known for access controls talks. And, the thing that he does, which is breaking into places. And right now he's breaking into, like literally this minute, he's dressed up in one of those uniforms you're talking about, Danny. And he's breaking into a place where if I said the name of the place, literally everybody on this call would know the name of the thing And honestly, I'm a little nervous right now. I wasn't as nervous before the Iowa courthouse thing.
Right. Right.
You know, but then you see Missouri this year. Well, we could.
Can you explain what the Iowa courthouse thing is?
I can do so. Do you want to maybe explain to Cindy the Missouri thing in a second? But I'll explain the Iowa courthouse thing if you want me to. Last year, two folk from I believe it was Coal Fire were engaged by the state of Iowa to test county courthouse security in the state of Iowa. Well, in one of those courthouses, they were caught and arrested by a local sheriff who did not respect their engagement letters and turned it into a really serious issue. It's still kind of an ongoing issue, even though the charges have been dropped, because those two people still have mugshots up on the internet. So they were arrested. They had to explain to their kids and family why that was going on. I'm going to be honest with you. You know, I think that really kind of came home to me, not as an information security professional, but as a wife. My husband's in one of those. I mean, not in a Bell uniform, but like in a uniform,
and with permission, right? So
yes, probably.
No, wait! Stop right there.
Yeah, let's not.
I know. You're not my lawyer, but you're a lawyer. Okay.
Well, just let's so not.
I'm actually sitting here thinking about this and going, it's nice to be distracted. I was messaging a just dear friend of mine, Amanda, her husband, Chris Nickerson, runs Laurie's, and, you know, he knows all this stuff too. And I was like, Amanda, you know, my lovely husband's at it again. And she was like, yeah, I know the feel. You know, there's kind of a limited number of us who like send people out to do this, and you can be arrested, you can be prosecuted. And like, I know who to call, but I don't want to call you for reasons other than morning wine, Cindy.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. But you're right. So the Iowa incident were people who were legitimately hired to break into something and did, and then, you know, basically that got whooshed away in the thing. And similarly, well, not similarly, in Missouri, there was a reporter, I think, with the St. Louis Dispatch, who discovered that an education website had a security flaw in it, and that the social security numbers of teachers and other schools employees were available to the public. And the governor called this person a hacker. But, you know, this is a person who's, again, I mean, you know, one of the things in the podcast that's so lovely is Tarah talks about doing a good deed at a bridal shop and, you know, getting nothing back. But this is like doing a good deed and getting, you know, the governor of your state calling you a criminal. These things are troubling. They're kind of the next step, right? The first step in this was to make it clear that this was legitimate work. And I think the second step is to make sure that that gets enforced all around, because, you know, this is the security reality that I think people like Tarah know better than anybody. Is the only way you can tell whether something's secure or not is to try to break it. And there's no, everybody, you know, I think it's a Bruce Schneier quote that, you know, everybody can build an encryption scheme that they themselves could not break. But that is not actually the measure of whether something is strong or not. You have to have other people, and it's almost a, you know, it's a community type event, right? The way that security develops is a bunch of people hacking on something, trying to figure out whether it's broken, trying to poke holes in it. You know, when we say something's secure, what we're saying is we've done a lot of that, and nobody could break it yet. Not that there is some kind of security threshold that we've reached and we're over, but more like, well, all these smart people tried and they couldn't do it.
Yeah. I think just to throw in another case here while we're piling up the contemporary cases. I mean, I think sometimes people go, oh, that's the crazy Americans with their crazy, you know, overreactions and stuff. So still going on, but when I was at EFF, one of the cases we worked on internationally, which some of you may know, and I can go into more details if you have questions about it, but is this Olabini case, right, in Ecuador, where and we went over there to try and, I mean, it's a complicated, the case itself is simple. I mean, the guy is innocent, right? He was accused of being part of like a huge hacking team that we're trying to bring down the country. And he's not even a security researcher, really. He builds secure languages, right? He builds sort of the tooling for security researchers. But of course, he has that mind, right? He likes to sort of, you know, play around with these things. And so, you know, at home, when they kick down his door, I don't know whether he had a lock picking kit, but I wouldn't be surprised. He had a lot of, YubiKeys. He had a lot of stuff that he was taking apart, looking at. And the police, did that thing of laying all of this out like they would with a drugs haul and going, well, I mean, clearly up to no good here. And you're going, no, these are the tools of the trade, right?
These guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they want to see something. They should get a load of my garage.
Right. And yeah. And, it's one of those things where there is that moment in all of these things where you're sort of going, okay, I know this doesn't look good, but, and I think a lot of the, I mean, it's one of the things that I found fascinating when I was at EFF was this idea of optics, Cindy. And maybe you can explain what optics is in the world of law and being a lawyer in these cases.
Well, honestly, I think it's a failure of law sometimes. I mean, I think the whole point of the legal system ought to be able to tell the truth of what's going on. And I think too often when the deciders or the people inside the system don't actually understand what's going on, which happens a lot in computer research, they'll just default to the optics, right? So, and you end up in these weird places where, if you had stir on the end of your name after Napster, you were suddenly assumed to be engaging in copyright infringement when, the name doesn't have anything, that's just facially ridiculous.
So right? Optics is how it looks, right?
Right. Optics is absolutely how it looks, and how it looks generally to someone who isn't you, who isn't inside your community, right? So, having a set of lockpicks is, lots of people have sets of lockpicks for all sorts of legitimate reasons. The idea that would be an indicator of illegal behavior is just as ridiculous as discovering that somebody has a hammer. Oh my God, they must be somebody who beats people over the head. People who have hammers all the time know that that's not actually the primary use for them. People might have lockpicks because, they help their family get into their house when they get locked out.
It's true. And it's not just there's another side to the optics, which is there's the public view of what's happening. And I get that part of it. The side of it for those of us in the industry working with clients or trying to fend off concerns is the emotional work that goes into the relationships when you're talking to somebody maybe who hasn't ever been pen tested for the first time, and you explain to them what's going to go on. Just the process of doing that emotional work doesn't end. Like signing the contract to do a full red team engagement. This is what I do for a living, right? So signing that engagement letter, signing and getting started on the contract, you still have to do that emotional work all the way through, because I'm here to tell you at least 3 or 4 times during most of these engagements, I get a senior executive who all of a sudden says, wait a minute, what's going on here? Are you telling me that we could actually have our security tested? What's going to happen? Are we going to deal with brand management issues? How do we handle the fact that we need to communicate that we have security failures? And just the process of emotionally educating people and saying, look, everyone has to deal with security issues over time. There's no such thing as security, which is perfect. What we're trying to do is make you safer in reality, make you not, the people who are just kind of looking up right now and going, cybersecurity, what is this? Right? You need to emotionally educate people. And that is how you kind of walk people down from the brink if they begin to panic a little bit during a test. And it sounds to me like in the Iowa courthouse, in the Missouri case, everyone did that emotional work. And we've bumped up at this point against sort of that next level that I think the EFF is really starting to work on. It's not the companies anymore, it's policymakers. Yeah. It's governments now that aren't understanding the work that we're doing, and they're freaking out when they see it in action. So, yeah. I mean, that's emotional work that we're all trying to learn how to do now at the nation state level. So where's them lawyers, Cindy?
Yeah. No, I think it's really true. I mean, this comes up over and over again. This last week or so, Apple sued NSO Group, Apple, which is something we're cheering. They sued NSO Group, is, for those who aren't following this, is a scummy company that sells surveillance software to clearly to some repressive governments who have used it and been involved in some pretty horrible human rights abuses. The killing of the journalist Khashoggi appears to have had a piece of NSO group surveillance in the story behind it. So we're talking, murder. We're not talking like, inconvenience with the use of this. So Apple sued using the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act because this software basically breaks into people's computers. And the thing that we're talking about a lot with people is why that's important and we support it, and why we have to make sure that we're not hurting the very people who told us about this software, people like Citizen Lab and other people. Like, in our zeal to go after NSO Group, which is strong, and I share, and EFF has been active on this for a long time, we have to make sure that we're not actually undermining the work that it took to get us to the place where we know this, and that these things can be two sides of the same coin, and that you have to look beyond is this software capable of seeing something on somebody else's computer. You have to look at what's going on in a bigger context to be able to figure out where liability is proper and where it's not. And that's why the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is such a poor tool for this. It does none of that. It doesn't draw the lines. It doesn't help us draw the lines between the stuff we want to protect and the stuff we want to go after. So this is why in this particular instance, we're happy that Apple has the CFAA to use to go against NSO Group, but we're really got to be careful about how this goes from here.
Yeah. I also. I have an echo.
Oh no!
Is that me? Or
you just started echoing.
You sound good to me.
Okay. Tara, you talk while I stop echoing. One moment.
Okay, I'm muted. You still echo, so hopefully it's not me. There we go. All right. So I was loving that Cindy just brought up the CFAA. I mean, it's the bugaboo, the crazy monster under the bed, the insane demon of our entire field, and it's gotten to this mythical level at this point because you can use it in so many different ways as a tool for ill. And, I think this is all going to be a systemic thing. I'm going to keep saying this again and again, that this is a systemic issue for our entire industry. It's not just the optics. It's not just the emotional work. It's also that we've got to have some policymakers start to meet us halfway here. And for all that we have, to the best of our abilities, done things like professionalize the industry. Certainly Alan at SANS, rest in peace, did an incredible amount to credentialize the industry. We've got people who are now working to really make it understood what election security vulnerabilities are and aren't. Got Matt Blaze out there over at Georgetown doing this kind of work again and again to clarify to policymakers what we're doing and how we're doing it. And yet it just, every single time that we come up against a policymaker who thinks you can whistle nuclear codes into a payphone and open up Cheyenne Mountain, every time we deal with a governor in Missouri who thinks that right-clicking on a web page and inspecting element equals hacking, and doesn't understand that he himself literally authorized the disbursement and publication of that information. That is on literally him. Every single time we have something like that happen where people don't understand the most simple elements of the difference between publishing plain text stuff on a website and encryption intended to harm someone, it makes us a little more nihilistic. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to see that nihilism. I want to see hope in this industry and fun and clarity and increasing professionalization, right?
I also feel that one of the problems here is when this stuff does become political, and I think we're, the big elephant in the room here is it's now geopolitical. It's state versus state in a lot of ways. That means prosecutions get used as a weapon as well, right? There was, I don't have any insight on this, but the fact that the governor of Missouri made a big deal out of this must have been partly because politically it felt like something that would get him. I tweeted just who thinks that this is going to reflect well on the governor, that they don't even know these things. But of course I'm in my little world where everybody knows this is a foolish thing to do. And the truth is again, picking on the Olabidi case, the thing that complicated it, right, was that the Ecuadorian government were switching their policy on. They've been holding Julian Assange in their embassy in London, and the policy of the government changed. That was actually the point where they threw him out, and so they kind of had to turn the press cycle there from Julian Assange, hero of the Ecuadorian people, to bad guy who should, we don't trust anymore. So they had this big thing of, hackers have turned against Ecuador and are hacking it. We suspect Julian Assange is behind this, and this is why we threw him out. And of course, there were no hackers doing this, but they had to find them. And I think I see that that's the thing that worries me as this becomes more of a problem. That it may be blown up, particularly by snake oil merchants, right? Where people go, you've got to give us millions of dollars to fix this problem. The more politicians will go, okay, what are the usual suspects that we have to round up?
Yeah.
And they're security researchers, right? They look like they're visible. They've got the lockpicks. They fit the profile. They go to jail.
But that's, okay. I mean, again, you can't fix this entirely with a well-written law, but we have a spectacularly badly written law that feeds into this. And, the CFAA has been exported all around the world. There's a version of it in Ecuador, and there's a version of it in all sorts of places. That's one of the ways that we combat this is education, and that's tremendously important. But the other way we combat this is kind of, don't have vague, overbroad laws, and that's one of the things that that we don't have with the CFAA. And I love Tarah's reference to the whistling into the phone, and because that's the movie War Games, which the story is that that's how we got the CFAA in the first place. That Ronald Reagan and a couple other highly placed people saw that movie and thought that Matthew Broderick could launch nuclear weapons with a whistle over the phone. So that's just a bad way to do any legislation. But so
we're scared. We're scared every single time we try to do something new at this point. We're scared every time we try to do something normal, plain, and old school at this point.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I started, and it's continued on in the community, this project called the Nerd List. And it is a collection of passwords used in movies, film, pop culture, whatever that we can use, that we can run whenever we're doing password cracking, hash cracking, really. And what kills me is not only how often it's used, and how often these kinds of passwords are used. We're talking like Zion 0101 from The Matrix, Trust No One from the X-Files, Hunter 2 from that really famous thread. I mean, people have been using this. It's under my name. You can go take a look at it right this second. And if somebody uses this and does something unauthorized with it, is that going to come back to me?
Yeah.
There's an email for you. But we're talking, these are passwords that are commonly used, that are found in media, that have been published in film. People use the password from Swordfish like a depressing amount in their Active Directory hashes. So this is the kind of thing where we're doing something fun and lighthearted, but this could come back and get me, and I don't know if it's going to. I'm taking that tiny extra chance as we all push the envelope outward, hopefully for understanding.
I mean, they cracked those passwords in the movies. Like, it's not like you went, oh, this is a good password. It's like, these were the passwords that they got. So, yeah, I remember Alec Muffet, who's a British security researcher, wrote one of the first password crackers and was like pilloried in the press for being an evil hacker. Well, so we're getting a few questions in, and also to reflect our podcast, How to Fix the Internet in Miniature. As you all know, Tarah, we get our guests to, we bond on all the problems like this, and then we go to the solutions, because as you say, there's no point being paralyzed in fear. We have to get to a positive world. So while I'm looking at the questions, the question that we asked you in the podcast, and I don't want to spoil it, but is there any industry that we can learn? Has anybody done this before, gone through this pain, and come up with something useful that we can learn from outside of our industry?
I love that question. Thank you, Danny. Permit me to tell you that I love planes. They're fun to look at. They're fun to fly. They're fun to be in. I'm a student pilot right now. And the reason I'm sitting here right now instead of a different day is it's raining outside and I can't go out and do a little learning and flying. But I love the industry, and I've had conversations before about how aviation security and improvement has worked over time. I did a talk on this at DEF CON's Aviation Village the last time we had a DEF CON in an aviation village. And just pretty recently, actually, we Rob Knake, Adam Shostak, and I released a report out of Harvard's Kennedy School at the Belfer Center on aviation security and how we can take the lessons of the NTSB and apply them to the mandate for a CSRB, a Cyber Safety Review Board, that Biden announced but hasn't yet implemented in the executive order from this year. This is my cat. Get down, Frankie. The nature of aviation is that there is a massive culture of sharing your mistakes and a blameless postmortem when something goes wrong. Now, that doesn't mean people don't face consequences, but the nature of aviation and why the NTSB does such a good job is not only their multi-stakeholder model, it's also that they have experts where experts belong. And those experts where they belong are shielded from the politics and the consequences professionally of making the determinations that they need to make. Aviation has done it right, and we now have the safest aviation climate that we've ever had at this point. But basically, planes don't crash anymore. Yeah. And yet, in cybersecurity, when we have these massive incidents, WannaCry, NotPetya, we don't even have any kind of shared truth on what happened for those, other than a couple of blog posts and a few news stories where often, respectfully, Danny, the journalists sometimes get it a little wrong. And now that becomes the truth that we have to go back and look for, years later, and there's no real shared history and lessons learned. So we're looking to get those lessons learned out there, I think. And I love how aviation did it. I want to see cybersecurity do the same thing. And yeah, deal with the fact that I just said cybersecurity people. That's what policymakers say. Keep going.
Do you agree, Cindy? Is this the sort of way forward? Is there stuff that you can draw in, like, creating the legal kind of environment or the optics to this?
I think it's definitely worth looking into. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of how aviation works. Obviously, Boeing just had a big, horrible problem, but it did get corrected. So planes, occasionally fall out of the sky. That is true. But I appreciate that Tarah has been in the middle of it and looking at it. And I think that is one way to, looking for good models in other areas. I mean, cybersecurity is important. Computer security is hard, but it's not the hardest thing in the world. Or if it is, there are other things that are real close to it. And I think aviation is one of those ones where it is complicated enough, the stakes are high enough that it seems like it might be a good example. And then how does liability go from there? I think, accountability matters, but making sure that the risk of liability isn't getting in the way of people talking about what happened and getting a clear picture about what happened is tremendously important. Tremendously.
It's not just the getting a clear picture. It's also understanding what rules to follow in future. This is my checklist for a Cessna 172 Skyhawk. Okay. And this is the most dull checklist imaginable. I have to go through every single time, check and make sure that I've done every single one of the things on this list. And it's dull, but you know what? My plane hasn't fallen out of the sky yet. And I've found things that could have been a problem for it. One of the things we can cross-cut this answer going back to the question of the idea of charlatanism and InfoSec. Right. Don't trust the people who tell you that they've got a secret sauce or a magic new weapon. Trust the people who tell you that information security is extremely boring when it's done right. Trust the people who tell you that you need to be focusing on your patch management cycle. I've seen companies that take years to fix critical vulnerabilities at this point, whose average, like across all the vulnerabilities they have outstanding, is years on average to patch vulnerabilities. That doesn't happen in planes in the same way. And so trust people who tell you that stuff is boring, because honestly, flying a plane is like an hour of awesome, but it's like 10 hours of incredibly dull form filling beforehand to make sure nobody dies. And in cybersecurity, we're now getting to the point where people can die if we screw it up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have, I don't know whether it's come out yet. I don't think it has, with the interview with Window Snyder, who's a brilliant security person who is working on taking some of these lessons and applying them to the Internet of Things. And yes, I am reliably told that will be up and coming in 2022, which is not that far away. So
it's
coming
a
soon to your
fabulous
podcast.
interview, and they fit well together, right?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, Tara's pointing to the future of cybersecurity, and what Window's saying is, well, we've had 20 years of cybersecurity and we've learned some things. Let's feed them over into the Internet of Things world where things are much worse. So,
because we have to get better at this as software eats everything. We're sort of like running, if we don't get there, then there are going to be these problems in airplanes that are actually our problem now, like because it's software. Right. Okay, let's go to some questions that folks have been asking, and this one's from Fred Flintstone on YouTube, not his real name. Well, it's true. It's true. It can be. Is government regulation the only answer to, actually, he says Internet of Things security, but maybe we can talk about this more widely because there's definitely regulation in the airline world, right? Since neither vendors nor purchasers seem to care enough to do anything. I'll start with Tara. You like this.
I'm gonna flip it back over to Cindy here in just a second here, but I'll note that it's not necessarily government regulation. It's appropriately aligned legal and economic incentives, some of which might include government regulation. Right. It's not that vendors and purchasers don't care. It's that their risk management calculus is off based on what's in the public interest as opposed to their private interest. The job of government regulation, FTC, any of the regulators that are out there, any of the standards bodies, NIST, any of the incident responders like CISA, they're part of a package of appropriate incentives to get people to do the right thing. And that's the short answer. Please, Cindy, tell me where I'm wrong.
I agree completely. I think it's really not about regulation or not regulation. It's about what can we do to align the incentives. And there may be places for legal, I'm certainly a huge fan of legal liability, because if you hurt somebody, you should have to make them whole. And right now, that is actually not what we're doing with a lot of these situations. And so I think that that's one of the things that can help give a feedback loop and accountability and frankly, just make fairness happen. But it's not regulation per se. It's what is the regulation doing? And is it supporting a firmer world, or is it just making you have to, check a whole bunch of boxes or go on bended knee to a regulator to get permission to innovate? Those are all the things that, we've seen regulation do sometimes when it's kind of decoupled from the actual goal.
Yeah. There's two asterisks to that too, which is that one of the reasons we have those misalignments has to do with legal liability inside companies. Often, respectfully, it is the lawyers who tell you, you can't say anything, you can't fix anything, you can't acknowledge that this just happened. We need to deal with the consequences of having received vulnerability reports or the consequences of regulation. And sometimes the incentives inside a company look very different than they do externally. It's one of the reasons why we found that the reason aviation security has gotten better, the reason incidents have dropped in aviation security is because there's not only that process of blameless postmortems, but also the legal requirements make it more expensive to not tell the truth to the government and the public than they do to keep it secret. That's not the case. The incentives flipped in cybersecurity. Yep. And the second asterisk to the process of getting this whole thing solved is right now, as we push forward in cybersecurity with the incentive misalignment that we have, it's really often true that culture of secrecy is it's so embedded everywhere that we can't get people to just tell the truth everywhere.
Yeah, well, and one of the other ways that this happens is through confidentiality agreements, trade secrets claims, but there's a whole bunch of legal barriers to transparency, and we also need legal support for transparency, but that can't be a liability get out of jail free card for people who hurt other people.
Well, I think it's that thing. We go back to this theme of like fear and safety, right? That if people are scared, I mean, we learned this from doing at EFF, from doing security trainings, right? Because there was this whole period where people who were very vulnerable, didn't know the first thing about how to protect themselves, just using end-to-end encryption and these sort of things. And we went out there, and I think we kind of initially had that thing, which is a little bit from activism, a little bit from InfoSec security, of like going, oh man, it's really bad out there. You're going to be attacked immediately. And they can see everything. And it just led to this, people just turn off, right? They're just so scared. And I think this happens in a corporate place too, where they're just like, I don't want to hear about it, cover it up, like, don't
Literally
let
that.
anyone know. Right.
The National Defense Authorization Act yesterday dropped the language requiring reporting of cybersecurity attacks and incidents to the government. Yesterday they dropped the language from it. We're the opposite of succeeding right now. Like, it's not failing. It's almost like we're looking at our previous successes and literally deliberately rolling them back. This is like, it's like you just nuked your Git repo of good law on the process and you're just heading right back to the beginning again.
That's so funny. That's a place where I think we disagree, Tara. I think that, I mean, mandatory reporting of security problems to the government has not actually resulted in a lot of companies feeling really great about what happened after that, right? You tell the government, they say, thank you very much. And then you never hear from them again a lot, or, you know, you don't really know what happened. And so I think I don't think mandatory reporting to the government, especially in this context of secrecy, it's government secrecy is actually, right. It needs to be buttressed, right? We need the government not just sitting on vulnerabilities that it hears about. The vulnerabilities equities process is broken. We need the government without more responsibility in the government with what it does for the information. EFF is not all that comfortable with the reporting requirements because, you know, it's a privacy issue, right? I mean, often what they're reporting to the government is, you know, your personal private information. So it's something that we've been nervous about all along without all the other pieces, because it's, you know, it's an ongoing issue that the government wants as much information about you as possible. Once it gets its hands on it, no matter how it got its hands on it, it can use it against you. And so making sure that we're not opening another avenue of surveillance is really important. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of Fourth Amendment stuff about how if the government gets it for one purpose, it shouldn't be able to use the other. I mean, I've got a whole list of things I would like to do to fix this, but I have to say, you know, we weren't deeply involved in this round of it, but in the past, we have been really nervous about just tacking on, well, and then you have to tell the government to somebody who's suffered a security problem, because that alone, I don't think will get us there, and it can backfire.
Yeah.
I'm going to love the disagreement on an ongoing basis. I think you're absolutely right. And as people of goodwill often do, we've got different perspectives on what needs to happen because we think that the process is going to work in two different ways. Yeah. I want the mandatory reporting and that process to continue because from my perspective, it's been the companies that don't acknowledge their vulnerabilities that have created the biggest problems in terms of security. But what you and I are talking about are two different values, privacy and security. Yep. Right. And you can make trade-offs between those things. And in this case, there's a trade-off to be made and we can tune that variable as we go. But for me on this one, less transparency about when a company's experienced an attack and what the vulnerability was is less of a good thing, especially if we can shield personal information while doing so.
So is the solution here really thinking about this more like a public transparency is sort of increasingly happening with data breaches? Is your concern, Cindy, that this data is just getting handed to the government? The government is another pit of secrecy, so nothing happens with it, and it's potentially exploitable by bad actors in the government.
Well, I mean, the first two are definitely true. The second part about exploitable by bad actors in the government, maybe, but you know, the U.S. Justice Department takes the position that as long as the government gathered the information legally in the first instance, they can use it for other purposes as well. And so I'm actually, I don't, you know, you might call them bad actors. I think the Justice Department would call it what they do.
Right, yeah.
So I think that we have to be really careful about thinking about these things, because if you're thinking it's going to go into this one little silo and it's never going to be used for anything else, I've got news for you about what happens inside the U.S. government around criminal investigations and things like that. It's not necessarily the case. So I think Tara and I, if they put us in a room together, we could sort this out and get to a good place pretty quickly. But I'm nervous that a lot of what's going on isn't that, and we're going to be stuck with it. But I mentioned a little this vulnerabilities equities process. Like, we need an ongoing process where the U.S. government, having been told of or discovering a security flaw, has to err on the side, except in the most extreme situations, of helping us fix it, not hanging on to it so that it might be able to spy on somebody later. And that mix is way off, way off. This is where the spyware companies come in, like NSO Group. They're feeding this piece where governments want to be able to stockpile vulnerabilities so that they can use them in the very rare situations in which that would work. But the rest of us say unpatched and unprotected in the meantime. And, you know, personally, I would much rather not be broken into in the first place than make sure that the government has a really easy time catching somebody who breaks in, right? It's the forensic versus the security issues. And the government stockpiling vulnerabilities is, you know, forensic. They want to be able to solve things at the end or do their own affirmative things. Whereas I think that our priority ought to be security in the first place and making our systems as secure as possible so that we don't get broken into.
Well, so go ahead. You're about to ask the thing that I want you to ask, Danny.
Okay, I will ask the thing that you wish me to ask. I am the controlled questioner. So this is, I put it into our internal chat. This is actually a question that the brilliantly self-named algorithms manipulator asks, which is, should governments buy all the premium exploits, which governments do right now, then disclose them?
So in answer both to that question and to Cindy's point, sometimes the EFF is on the cutting edge, honestly, so much of the ODA that has been created or discovered, the people that are caught up in it. The truth is, most of the time, I think, and I think that many people would agree with me on this one, it's not that companies are developing awesome monster ODA. It's that they're embarrassed about the fact that they didn't fix a thing that's been publicly disclosed for months or even years. Yeah. And we're talking about NotPetya, we're talking about not WannaCry. These are vulnerabilities that were out there for months before this happened. And when we're talking about the 143 million people that just lost their data in the Equifax hack in 2017, you can barely call that a hack at this point. It was the Apache Struts vulnerability that was the underlying flaw. The CVE had been out and patched for 8 months.
Yep.
That's not a question of governments needing to engage in a vulnerabilities equities process with ODA with Russia. That's somebody who was asleep on the job for 8 months. And that's embarrassing. I want to solve the problem of companies that are disincentivized to reveal embarrassing information, not governments trying to figure out how to protect citizens.
Yeah, and I think that there are ways to do that. I mean, the data breach law in California has made a huge difference, right? In California, and that includes a lot of companies who are not, you know, primarily in California, because you've got California customers, you know, your liability goes down if you notify people that their data's been breached. And so I think there are other incentives that we've actually seen. I think a federal data breach law would be great. But the important part of that is that you've got to tell the people who are affected. You don't just tell the government. And you know, there are emergency examples. There are other sorts of situations in which, you know, that's not all the time the case. There are exceptions, but in general, the people who need to know that their data has been, you know, let go are the actual people who are impacted by it. So,
and it's so top level, right? It's so top level what we're talking about right now. International law and governments and policies. Number one, the truth is that any person in this community, any person anywhere can reach out and do things like provide comment on public policies, can join the feedback circles for all of these policies. One of the things that the United States is going to have to start dealing with sometime pretty soon here is the new vulnerability disclosure best practices that were released by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development this last year. And I was part of that working group of people that helped to provide comments on that to make sure that all the language was sensible. That anybody can reach up and touch those policies and fix them and make them better. Part of the reason that matters is because down here where the data meets the dirt, these aren't just government policies. They are affecting human lives. I've looked in the faces before of people who have been terrified of the fact that they were under indictment for the CFAA. I'm very pleased to tell you all, I just signaled my wonderful husband and he's doing just fine. He's apparently kicking ass, taking names, taking pictures of elevators, doing the
Is he in? Is he kind of, has he broken through?
No, no, kicking ass means he's doing it. So okay, no, he's broken into all the things and everything's fine. And
just see him going.
Everything's fine. So Tara gets another drink from that fabulous goblet.
Yeah. Right. So he breaks into another place. I get to get another ounce of Cabernet. But no, this is real for everybody, everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I do take your point that certainly the Equifax hack, it was the second time, right? I mean, Verizon does this big survey every year or every other year of what are the big data breaches and what are they caused from? And it's like 80 to 90% of them are things where patches are available. It's an incredible number. For consumer data breaches. So I really do take your point about that the vulnerabilities equities process of the purchase of ODAs is almost they're very far apart in the real world. Now, that doesn't mean we don't care. I care a lot about vulnerabilities equities process and having it be fair. And it's a horrible name. We didn't come up with it, but I do think that the government needs to demonstrate that it's on the side of fixing things before I'm interested in more things being shoveled towards them as opposed to troubled towards the people who are affected, the security community, a broader community of people.
I want to manage it better. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think we're almost up for time, and we've got 4 minutes. So I know it went so quickly. This is great. They do Twitch streams for like hours. We could just watch Tara getting steadily drunker and have a 4-hour shift, but no, apparently not.
On half a glass of what? No, not with the clarifying topics.
Well, it's a multi-hour Twitch, so we can
get. Yeah.
Well, that might be trouble. No, I'd have to put that away and head for the soda machine.
Yeah, no, don't worry. We'll wrap it up in 4 minutes. I'm getting steadily caffeinated too. So, all right. So, Tara, I have a question from a Tarah Wheeler in the chat. So, do you want to ask about poker?
I want to ask about poker, and here's the reason I stuck it in. We all collaborated on questions and stuff before this. And so one of the things I've kind of wondered for a while is it's rough without EFF Summit and the fundraisers that we've had in the past for EFF, and as I try to take my responsibility as an advisory board member for the EFF, which I can't believe you let me join the club, pretty seriously. And one of the ways I want to do that is really have this conversation about how information security and risk management is really similar sometimes in poker and in cybersecurity, right? I've talked about it a lot. And one of the fun things I think we did last year was 2 years ago at DEF CON was an EFF benefit poker tournament. I'm dying to do that again. Can we do that sometime?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
No, there's so many people. It's a poker. I find and those sort of games very interesting because they're all about threat assessment, threat modeling, but they're all about risks and benefits and calculating probabilities. So you do get and of course faking it, right? You do get a lot of crossover between the InfoSec community and the poker playing community, and of course Las Vegas, right? So,
and of course Las Vegas. Yeah.
What do you think, Cindy?
Let's do it. Let's do it. I love it. We're in.
Okay.
I'll talk with the DEF CON.
How much you in for?
Yeah.
No, that's not us, right? We're not.
We won't. Well, let's put it this way: we're not wagering EFF money. That money is kicking ass and taking names to protect y'all. But there might be some EFFers who want to play.
Well, I will remind everyone that if you donate money to the Electronic Frontier Foundation right now, it's like roulette. You'll double your money because folks are kindly offering for every $1 you give the Electronic Frontier Foundation, someone out there will be giving another $1. So do give money to EFF. Thank you very much for Tara, advisory board member and all-round InfoSec super person. If you would like to hear more from Tara and everybody else that we interviewed about the future of the internet and how to fix it, do go to howtofixtheinternet.org or go to your local podcast app that you use and search for How to Fix the Internet with the EFF.
Yes.
And when you love it, write positive reviews, go, oh my God, this is amazing. Don't use bots to do that. Don't do that. But
trouble. We don't want that.
No,
but also big thanks to the Sloan Foundation. They made this available. They made this whole. They helped us make this whole podcast and available. And it's been so fun to get the chance to talk to people about how we make things better and how do we envision a world where we get it right.
And thank you very much again, Tara.
Yep. Thanks, Tara.
and an honor. Thank you so much to both of you, Cindy, Dan.
All right, take us away.